Yes, you're first.
Are you ready?
I am ready when you're ready.
Do you remember when sunset is? Is it
8 o'clock,
8 o'clock? Okay.
give or take a minute.
So we'll go for like till 7:50, maybe, to close. All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll open the council budget workshop for May 20th and roll call. Terry, Cheryl, Megan, myself, and Tom are here. And we're moving on to departmental budget and work plan review. And Sophie's general government continued.
Last time we met, we started to work through, we made it all the way through the assessing budget, we did the general overview, and we started to work through the town manager's budget lines. We looked at council as well. My suggestion is I have 3 department heads here tonight. I was thinking that we could work through their material, and then if we have time to pick up town manager, great. If not, I'm here every budget meeting, so we'll be able to slide it in. That work?
That's fine, yeah.
So this is a little change from previous years. On July 1st, Bell took over formal responsibility for town clerk's office, elections, general assistance, and IT GIS. So Bell is the department head here tonight to talk, to answer questions.
So we're starting on town office administration, page 6, maybe?
Yes. So I don't know what questions you might have for us. The budget that Bell has submitted for town office operations does not look at a change in staffing level. So there's no change in staffing level, no change in general operations.
There is some additional time for paid assistance in the elections.
That's in elections.
Yeah.
That's not.
If you have notes on the part that faces vertical and notes on the horizontal.
How can I help you?
Where are we on, where are we? Town manager and budget plan?
No.
On page 20 or 21.
Okay, got it.
So
We're all formal with microphones this time. I had brought up at the last meeting something that I thought was more appropriate to talk about tonight, which was this kind of shifting of work between the clerk and the front desk and that's an area of concern. And we talked a little bit about it last time, but I didn't know if there's anything maybe to expand upon how increased desk business is causing things to shift around and what we might be thinking about for the future down the road.
So several years ago, we used to have a town clerk who did not work on the front desk, and we had 2.5 front desk clerks. The half-time position also did some of the IT stuff. We had some retirements and we did some changes, so then we started having a working town clerk who sat on the front desk and was one of the first line people. And what we have found over the past few years is that that working town clerk, serving people coming in, doing their car registrations or getting a dog license or a landfill permit, those types of things, we were really struggling to keep up with the business that a town clerk actually needs to do, the elections work, the reports for the state, making sure that we're following all the rules and regulations that we need to. So we did a physical change in the office where we moved our town clerk back from the front desk. She's still in the same area, so she's able to step forward and help, but we're seeing very steady business for the two, kind of frontline clerks sitting at the desk, and then occasionally the town clerk has to step forward. At the moment, we're not contemplating any changes in terms of staffing moving forward, looking out years. We are kind of requesting some additional help for the elections, particularly knowing what we have coming up in 2020. The hope is that with this move, we'll be able to keep up a little bit better with the regulatory requirements.
So I can ask a follow-up. So to continue kind of talking a little bit more about the increase or the high volume of front desk traffic, can you talk a little bit about, and you mentioned that there are state requirements, there are regulations. Can you talk a little bit about how much of the volume of that front desk traffic has to do with things that the town processes on behalf of the state or things that the state mandates the town do?
Yeah, almost everything that we do at the front desk is required by the state. I guess technically perhaps the landfill permit might not be mandated by the state, but certainly controlling what goes into the landfill is mandated by the state. So, when it comes to fishing licenses and registering your vehicles and hunting licenses, all of those things are state programs that we process for them and then send them a check every week we process that.
So the only thing that we keep here are the sewer bills, the sewer use fees and the tax bills. But those, I would say, while we get many of them, are not the things that take the most time down front. That's usually a pretty easy transaction.
So just to summarize that, because we'll probably be talking about some interconnected related issues further on in the budget process, but it would be fair to say that we have quite a volume of work that is the result of business that we do on behalf of the state. And we are currently trying to be creative with our staffing solutions so as not to increase the budget, but there's a high demand of work on that particular department in the town.
Yes, and that demand has gotten higher the more of the student housing that comes in that requires year-long leases, the higher the volume has gotten because students are declaring Orono as their primary residence now, as opposed to, registering their car at their parents' home.
I'm curious about the online stuff, the things that you can do online, registrations online. And does that cut down the lobby, the business at the lobby?
It cuts down some. There's a lot of people who, even though they know that they can do it online, they like to come in. It's like their check-in, their relationship with the town. They do it once a year, and they like to interact with the front desk and see what's going on. There's also a bunch of people who they don't know what can be done. We're working on the website to make sure that we highlight all of the online options. The downside, of course, to the online options is that you do pay a credit card fee Whereas if you come in person, you're able to pay in check or cash without paying that fee.
You have to pay a fee if you use your credit card, right, in the lobby?
Yep, if you use your
Yeah.
credit card, regardless of how you use it, you have to
Yeah.
pay the fee. But in the lobby, of course, you're able to use a cash or check instead, which
Right.
doesn't hurt.
I guess I was just curious is if we are doing things more, online oriented, is that going to cut down the traffic in the lobby? So I was kind of surprised to see that it's gotten more instead of less.
So I think that the business activity has gone up at a pretty remarkable pace. So I think were it not for the online services, we would see an even greater volume. One of the things we've talked about with council before is how long are people willing to have people wait? We don't want to be the DMV, but on the other hand, is 15 minutes to come in and register your car or deal with your licenses reasonable? And based on the number of complaints I've received in my office, I would say it's probably reasonable. But I think we just want to keep an eye on that because there isn't a lot to stretch, I think is our perspective.
So I hear nothing but compliments about the people that work on the front desk and how helpful and cooperative they are from a range of folks in town. So they may be busy, but they're keeping up with it. I have a question, if I may. Can we talk a little bit about the part-time, is it an election clerk? No, it's
An
the
intern?
part-time salary under elections.
So
How is that going to, how is that going to be different than what's currently happening?
this would be, right now we have a variety of volunteers. A few years ago, we used to have business interns who worked in the front office as well as in the finance office. And the intern that worked in the front office did a lot of the voter registration activities. We don't have the budget to pay 20 hours a week for an intern. So, and what is required for, particularly for the primaries coming up for the 2020 election, we're not confident that we can handle it well with just the smattering of volunteers. So we're hoping to find somebody who's willing to work approximately 10 hours a week on average, probably more during election season, a little bit less post-election season. Although to be fair, I don't think I ever truly understood how long election season lasts because we're still wrapping up the November election just before we get to the March election, and then we're still doing, kind of voter registration, voter participation history stuff from the March election by the time we get to the June election. So there's maybe about a month before Shelley starts panicking again about the November election. So it lasts pretty much year round.
Does that 12,000 include election day workers?
Yes.
And overtime for full-time staff that work the elections.
Except for a few increases in supplies, that's really the only substantial increase in that department.
Yes.
Although I'm glad that you pointed that out, Tom, because I feel like as I read through this, I want to note these places where there are minor increases, but there's a lot of that threaded throughout the budget there's an increase in cost for advertisements, publishing advertisements, for office supplies, for food. So we're seeing the costs of our just doing business as usual incrementally rising. And we're seeing the volume of work that we're required to do for certain things incrementally rising. So perhaps we should expect other things to incrementally rise to compensate us for that.
And just to be thorough, there's no way that someone would like to do a capstone and not have to pay them to do this election work?
We could certainly investigate this, but these are really rote tasks. Like it's not, most capstone projects require learning, research, innovation, and this is filing voter registration cards, entering voter history into the computer. It is pure drudgery.
Administrivia.
Yeah. Hopefully that never makes it out when we put out an ad. But it's definitely, it takes a lot of attention to detail, a lot of care, but it doesn't take a lot of innovation.
I would also just say that while it predates the existing council, when we first started talking about bringing internships into the town, the message I received from council at that point was that we did not want to be unpaid. We didn't want to create a bunch of unpaid positions where we were getting work done and not charging, not internships that were simply not paid. So just as a general rule, based on that guidance from council, any internship that we offer that a student doesn't come to us with a specific request that we go out to try to fill is paid. We don't have many of them for that reason.
So is this just a one-year position then? Is this just a part-time just for the elections 2020 and then it will go back?
I would expect that we'd have the same budget in place for FY21 since that's when we would actually have the 2020 election is in November. Perhaps on the off season, the off year elections, we'll be able to do without it. I would expect, unless we're very lucky, that the person in the position would probably change on a fairly regular basis.
I will say that I don't know if that policy is as effective as it used to be, because now I'm seeing higher level, higher degree programs, their internships pay zero. And it's just the experience of and joy of being an intern.
I just need guidance from council because that was pretty emphatic when I proposed the idea of interns.
I think, and this is probably something to research, but I have a lot of interns at my business, and we were guided by attorneys that it's the law that you have to pay an intern. It's you can't use it as just labor with no compensation. So if even that were to happen, I would be questioning whether or not it was legal.
We have actually recently done some research into this, and in order to have an unpaid intern, there has to be a substantial educational component to the course of work that you are proposing that they take. It needs to be overseen by the university, and typically they're actually paying for a course at the university, which gets the professor to mentor them in that internship, which would qualify them to be unpaid. So, and without the Masters of Public Administration, that program is not available anymore. So we would have to be hunting pretty hard for somebody that this would fit directly into their educational program.
So, but now I'm going to go back to, so when we were just talking about having ways of doing things online, why do we have a fee? Because a lot of things that I do, transactions in the normal world, do not have fees, or if they do, they're kind of hidden. So you don't go like, why is there a fee? It's just part of the cost.
Yeah, so the town uses a third-party vendor, takes care of our compliance obligations with red flag rules and other. So it's a third-party transaction. We never hold the credit card numbers. We're not processing it. So we are being charged. So they are being charged because they're using a separate independent service that happens to be linked in and drops money into our state account, which then drops money into our town account. It is the way most municipalities deal with this when they.
And so private industry raises the prices for everybody in order to cover the transaction fees. In order for us to cover the transaction fees, we would have to raise our fees. Many of the fees are statutorily set. We can't raise them. And that, we shouldn't, as a municipal operation, we shouldn't charge all the taxpayers the cost for the few who want to use the credit card.
But if I come into the office and I pay and do the same transaction in the office, if I use a credit card through you, is there a fee attached to it there too?
It's the same process, whether you're doing it online or you're doing it in the office. It goes through the same processor. It's just whether you're entering the numbers in on the computer from the comfort of your home, or you're standing talking to our friendly front desk clerks and putting the card, swiping the card yourself.
Okay.
I just had a quick question about the area of concern about the mandatory electronic marriage license. Do we have notices that it takes a while and maybe they should schedule an appointment?
So when somebody comes or calls and to talk about or to ask questions about a marriage license, we usually schedule an appointment for them if we can. But if they walk in and we're able to serve them at that time, we take them in the order that they arrive. That's one of the transactions that takes a long time, as well as a new car registration. So both of those can take 30 minutes or longer. So when we have only two people at the desk, that's how you can run up against a long wait time. We just hope that you don't have simultaneous long transactions.
Does anyone else have any questions on town clerk?
I just had just a quick follow-up for the electronic marriage license. So since we're doing work on the website anyway, I would wonder, or I would guess that a lot of people would, this is the day and age of Google it, right? So like, oh, we want to get married. How do we do this? I probably looked on the internet a million years ago when Corey and I got our license here. But, perhaps is it very clear on the site, or is there a way that we can encourage appointment scheduling if they're going to the website to find out how to get a marriage license through the town?
I would have to look at what we have on there, but we can certainly put that on there, that this takes a budget some time and to encourage to get an appointment.
Can you explain how the general assistance numbers are going down? A general assistance baby is down 67%. Is that state?
I can't necessarily explain it. The current general assistance just depends on who's living in the community, who's coming in and asking for assistance. This is what the trend has been for the past few years. The use hasn't been as high as has been projected, but all it takes is one or two longer term cases that runs the numbers right back up. The rent is pretty consistent. Most of the rentals in Orono do not fall below the general assistance level of assistance. So, it all depends on how big their family is. Does it include heat? But we try to, the rent is the one that most people request help for. It's easier relatively speaking, to find assistance for food or personal goods or medication. It's harder to find help with
With
the
rent.
rent.
Do you know how much we've spent so far on rent general assistance? To date? Or last run?
You're talking about rent, Cheryl?
Yeah.
$2,885.
2,000?
Yes.
So I suspect that that's mostly.
Gotcha. So
And is that through March or that's through April, right?
that's through April. So I'm gonna say that
Unless that's burials.
I think that's very good. So about $2,800, almost
Okay.
2,900.
So we really only have May and June left, right?
So can I just
Sure.
let you know that 70% of this budget is offset by a projected revenue
Okay.
because we're reimbursed by 70%. My fear in carving this down is that just a few rents can add up. We've had, for example, under personal this year, we've had two or three burials, which are very expensive, and we've blown that budget. Under state law, you must fund qualified general assistance. So it doesn't matter that we're out of money in the budget. I've always tried to, we brought it down some, but we've tried to keep a good balance in that budget because you never know what is going to come through the door. And $13,000 is not a lot of money at the end of the day.
Can you
Particularly
move it,
since really only 3,900 of that is coming from the Orono taxpayers.
can you move it from one line to the other?
Oh, and yes, we do.
Oh, okay.
Should we move on to ITGIS? Page 15 for the narrative.
Have we gotten the sheets yet?
Anyone have any questions on
Yes,
IT?
we went to. So I do have an update on this. Go ahead, John.
This is the new.
So my only question was, on page 24, where you show the payroll in that department,
Yes.
or 25 rather, where does the remainder of that individual's salary come from? Where is that listed?
So it's in the community development budget. It's an economic development. So we're able to fund a portion of it, about
So,
10 hours a week. So
3/4 is in this budget, and
one quarter.
and 1/4 is in the other
In the
budget.
TIF budget. So just so, we have had to increase this wage, this particular wage. We have federal minimum standards we have to meet.
Mhm.
And we are currently going through the process of,
Recertifying the position.
yes, that's a good way to put it, recertifying the position. So for 2445, which is the budget number, went up to 25.
Yeah, 25 and some change.
And it changed that budget line from,
38, 139. over here.
Yes. Thought that was the new one.
That's the old one. We've got the new one in your
All right,
hand.
139.94 to 187. So not huge, but a little bit.
Yep.
And as we continue to work through that process, if that changes, we will most definitely bring back any increases, or
Mhm.
I don't think there would be a decrease here.
No.
Did I answer all your questions, Tom?
You answered my question, yes.
I had a question on the training line. That's a pretty large training budget for one department, so just curious as to,
So there are certifications and classes that we have identified that we would like our IT GIS person to be able to take. We haven't really had the time yet available in order to allow him to take those classes. The hope is that if we can get him trained up on like more switch administration, those types of things, that we would be able to reduce our contractor services line in the future.
so did we use any of it last year?
We have used very little of it. We just haven't had the same, we haven't had that bubble of time available where the workload has gone down enough so that we're comfortable enrolling him in that course.
I think the other piece too is through the recertification of the position, we have learned that there is a certain minimum threshold that has to be met, and some of this training is required to be able to meet that minimum threshold. So I don't think it's a discretionary, now that we're aware. I don't think sending him to training is a discretionary act. I think it's something that we have to do. We're going to have the position.
But the money from last year is being held over, so it's
So
larger.
I wouldn't normally hold that over into this coming year. That is not something that we have specifically identified. We'd let that lapse, and so this would be a new appropriation.
So I don't know how it works, is like when we finally get down to numbers, whether, this one I would like just to note, maybe that we look at actual certification numbers that we would have to pay, if that makes sense. I mean, if the course is 1,100, this may be an area that we can cut down, so put that out for later discussion, I guess.
I've made a note of it.
Anyone else have anything on IT, GIS?
On the areas of discussion in the narrative, where it says the ITGIS department is suggesting improvements in town office and public safety building, what's the improvement in the public safety building?
When I took over this department, we discovered that the recabling of both buildings was not really performed to industry standards. We have we've got a bunch of wires or cables running, through the ceilings, but they're not really on trades. They're not well labeled. They're not, they haven't really been tested from end to end. So both buildings really need to be properly cabled to industry standards, which would allow us to better maintain our infrastructure.
And for IT, for explain what is that? What's the cable for?
So when you go and plug in your Ethernet cable into
Right.
the wall,
Yeah.
there are cables that go from that jack up through the wall and then to in our case, our switch, which is downstairs, the appropriate place for the switch is actually upstairs here. In the fire department, it's the mezzanine. And in
Okay.
a home, you might have, I mean, if you have 6 jacks or something like that, you know, you're feeling pretty good. You've got a lot of connectivity. Here, we have, you know, 100 of these or more, and those are very large cables. We've got cable bundles that are like this.
Mhm.
And there's even more next door in the public safety building. And what we run into is that when we are experiencing difficulties, when we need to troubleshoot a particular jack, we can't find which port it is on the switch. There's nothing labeled. We spend a lot of time plugging stuff in and out and, you know, trying to see when something changes, and then marking it down. And of course, that's never the jack that goes back out again. It's always something else. So, you know, proper infrastructure management really is the first key to a good, well-maintained system.
Okay.
So that's the 20,000 in the capital budget.
Mhm. We also, when we put in Cat 6 cable, in order to have the voice over IP phones, we didn't remove the old cable and we didn't remove the copper cable for the phones. So we have a lot of redundant cables just running through the walls, which means that when we need to add an extra jack or an extra cable, there is no room. So we're, you know, having to run a new chase just for one cable. And that makes life a lot more complicated and is one of the reasons why it is difficult to find that extra time for our IT person to do the training that he needs to do.
Is this something we would contract out, or are we doing it in-house?
We,
Facilities can't help with it.
that $20,000 is based on a informational RFQ that we had sent out for contractors. We don't have while we could learn the standards, we don't have the training to do it ourselves.
Anything else, council, on these departments? Or should we take Belle out of the hot seat?
Well, just a point of clarification. Are we going to deal separately with the capital budget, or should we be referring to the capital budget as we go?
You have Bell here. If you have capital budget items that have to do with IT or any other department that she's responsible for, I would speak now.
Okay.
I would never say you have to forever hold your peace.
I wasn't thinking forever.
No.
I just wanted to show that I looked at it.
I'm impressed.
I give a star.
Maybe we will move on and
Yep.
go to the next. Who's up next?
Dave Mylan. And I'm just going to remind Dave that he doesn't have his mug in front of him, but he should keep it brief.
Wait, with a shirt that color should.
I always like to say they pay me by the word. They just don't pay me much for each word. So
What page are we on?
You're going to move to
Assessment,
page, yeah, after assessing. So you go to your yellow, your goldenrod sheet. The narrative starts on page 3 after that sheet divider. And then his line items start on page 13 in that section. I'm assuming everybody has the beautiful yellow department dividers in there.
Golden.
Sure.
Oh, I won't think I would have called that goldenrod.
Orange?
So planning starts at the bottom of page 12 and continues into 13.
So you want us to do subject by subject, or do you want us to skip around?
I think it would be better for people who are not as familiar with the departments as you are if we could kind of take planning and then code and then economic development, if that.
So that's page 12 and 13 if you're in the,
I'm in completely in the wrong place.
you're still in general government.
Thank you.
So just want to remind folks that the payroll increases for both in planning are caused in small measure by the increase in our planner's salary. We started a new planner, so there's a step increase to bring them up to market. The majority of that $10,000 is increase has more to do with the reallocation of administrative support. If you recall, there was a lot of administrative support in assessing before. We have moved some of that out, and we have reallocated the full-time position and half-time community development position within the budget. You can see that when you look at payroll. That's the big, long sheet that you have to pull out because we've got too much information there for you. But it does break out who works what hours for what department, or at least who is funded for what hours from what department, which department.
Anything on planning?
I just had a question about just also want to note very briefly that Evan Rickard's services end in June 2019. We'll miss you, although we'll probably drag him back in somehow.
I have no doubt.
But I wanted to just ask about the decrease in the comp plan implementation budget line, only because I'm just curious.
So I talked with Dave quite a bit about that. We've been carrying money forward in that comp plan implementation for quite a while. And in bringing Kyle on, he has a really high level of expertise. We're not needing as much outside assistance. Evan definitely got us over the most technical aspects of implementing the comp plan. And Avi is doing a really yeoman's job with the GIS elements, which is part of what Evan was looking for from that line when he suggested it. So I still want to keep some money in the line, but if we're moving money forward every year, I think that we should see what $2,000 does for us. And if we run out, then we'll have to stop. No, just joking. We'll have to look at other places that we can. But I think that's a reasonable number.
Do you mind just briefly touching on some specifics of the sort of the expertise that allows our new planner to maybe do some of these things with less of a specific budget for outside help.
You want me to take?
You go ahead, you're on the roll, so keep going.
All right. So when we had budgeted here, at first, when we had Evan, the lion's share of this was used for mapping and for Mac, the historical architect that helped us with the Main Street overlay, the implementation of the Main Street overlay district. When we were transitioning away from Evan's leadership in planning and somebody new, the person that we brought in had, while a very good scope of knowledge, did not have the technical base that we find Kyle does. His degree program really focused on being able to read regulations and implement things in a way that we're not using the same type of legal review. The legal review, when we send things out, are coming back at a much lower price because there's less to fix. And I would say, as we would expect, we have a planner now who is very research based. So we're finding a lot of answers in-house and we're taking the time. I think that some of the other things that you've allowed Dave to do in his department with administrative support is allowing our planner to really pay more attention to the technical pieces of the job as opposed to making sure that letters get out. Would you agree?
100%. The only other thing I would add to that is if you, as an example, if you look at the Park Street project, that the plan we did, a lot of the drawings and the schematics that people allowed people to understand in a way that in the past we would have to have contracted that out. Kyle did all that himself.
So we made a smart hire that's potentially going to save us
So
a
I
little bit
hope
of
he's
money.
not watching at home because I don't want him to, but he
It could
is,
be all right if he did.
he is a remarkable employee.
Very,
and
very fortunate.
we are very fortunate to have him.
Sophie, the unscheduled overtime, or Dave, I assume that's for planning board meetings, for
Correct.
administrative assistant to do notes and,
Yes, she also serves as the secretary for the planning board. Typically, we flex our time when we can do that, so that, but it's there in case there are a few times things will come up, and there's a few times it'll come up that we're too busy to be able to flex things.
gotcha.
We've
Just-
never come close to using it, all of it. So we're usually pretty good about being able to flex it.
Good.
Just a safety net.
And just a point of clarification. So we're saying the planner owns the printer and the other departments kind of borrow it. I didn't see the printer in any other section. So 750 covers the whole community development for the printer.
I think that comment, Cindy, is not just about, that's more illustrative. So when Dave when Dave kills his whatever, which he does, that would come out of here. Anything that's not economic development related. I think code has a small office supply line, but it's not sufficient for small equipment. Adding machine, which by the way, a calculator, which they would need, or thumb drives. Nope, that's not office equipment, sorry, that's office supply. The printer is the big plot printer that the whole town uses, and we split that maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, just a set of ink for that, the printer is, about $450. So we go through usually one set a year, so it's just to give you an idea.
Anything else on planning?
I'm just very briefly going to note that the United States Postal Service has increased its prices, so we've got a small line item increase for postage for the planning department. So costs are going up everywhere.
I would just remind council too that there are elements in this budget that we don't budget for. So when we have to do mass mailings for a planning board application, advertisements, that sort of thing, there's usually revenue to offset. But so for the purpose of the budget, we don't include any of those activities in these budget lines.
Move on to code enforcement. Have any questions on code enforcement?
Code enforcement. All right. So some of it's just I don't understand what this means, and some of it is, I'm curious about hiring the deputy. That's a different question. On the the tier pages at the beginning of community development, where we're at code enforcement and then what they do and what level we're at, tier 3.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, right there.
Yep.
I have a question because, I have 2 questions on this one. I'm assuming, and not assuming, that the bold is where we're at, right? We're tier 3, the bold print. Yes?
Yes.
Bold print is what okay, that's.
Yep.
Good. Where it says maintain required CEO certification on there, here's my question is like all of the tiers, like our tier, I don't understand maintain required CEO certification. I get that, but the tier 3 doesn't, a full-time employee given workload constraints, this is a system that is complaint driven or reactive. I don't understand what that means when it comes to maintaining required CEO
So this
certification.
This is about the level of service that we're able to provide. So if you go
Right.
across, the minimum is that you have to, you must have a planning board. You don't have a choice. You
Right.
have a planning board. The second is to have a code officer, but not have them be a full-time employee. Many towns do that, where they contract either with an agency or an individual that comes in and does code enforcement as needed.
Right.
The third tier is, we have a full-time code office that's
Right.
staffed during normal business hours. However, given the fact that we have one 40-hour code officer for a community of almost 11,000 people, this is not by design, it is not a proactive, he's gonna go out and find all sorts of code violations. Instead, this is a complaint-driven
Right.
operation.
But the service says maintain required CEO certification. So he's doing that, right?
Absolutely.
I guess he has time for that, right? to maintain his
Yeah.
certification.
I think when we look at that title, it's more about maintain a certified code enforcement officer. And how are you going to do that? Are you going to, right?
Yeah,
And-
those are all multiple things that each one of those columns, is-
Right.
yes, he has to do this, but he also has, the other pieces of it. So they're included in all of those.
Okay, I just thought that was just something that he had to do anyway. The
So-
way it reads to me is that he doesn't have time to maintain a CEO certification?
No.
Just on this, only on this line right here.
He must have
Yeah,
a
that's what I
CEO
thought.
certification. You're given 364 days to get one once
Right.
you're appointed, and then you must maintain it.
Right.
What this is more talking to, Cheryl, is what are the requirements? So we're telling you, we've got a certified code officer that is full-time,
Right.
that we can provide fairly prompt response to emergencies, but otherwise we are complaint-driven or application-driven as opposed to proactive out searching for violations of the code.
But each column is giving you a different level of service. So it's just a matter of, yes, they would have to do it in the other columns as well. But there's
Right.
more to it than the column to the left
Okay.
and less than the column to the right.
Okay. And then my other question was the workload constraints, and this is if we're trying to operate, if we're operating at a tier 3, but the workload constraints are too much for us to have a tier 3 code enforcement, then why are we not going to an outside agency? Why are we not at tier 2?
So I would argue that a tier 2 wouldn't give us anywhere near the same service level. It is a substantial decrease. What we have done, Cheryl, is probably more of a hybrid of tier 2 and tier 3.
Okay.
What we've said is on an annual operating basis,
Mhm.
if nothing major happens in town and it's just the regular flow of activity, our full-time person on a reactive basis can manage, we can get inspections of small construction projects done, we can respond to complaints, we can take in the code process that we have to for shoreline zoning and that kind of thing. But if there is large construction projects, a few years ago, we moved to requiring an independent third-party inspector to manage those projects. So when the Avenue came in, they
Mhm.
escrowed their building permit fee, and we used that fee to pay for the third-party inspection for the project. In the next 2 years, we know there are 2 major projects coming up. One potentially at the school if the referendum passes, and one at the University of Maine with the new engineering building. With those 2, at this level of service and with this budget, we would be requiring both of those entities, if it required significant inspection, to pay for us to engage an independent third-party inspector to do the work. So that's kind of what we've said is, yes, we'll pay people, but we'll only do it when we need to. We'll keep our full-time person here to be able to manage the day-to-day operation.
Can I add to that, if I may, just a few minutes, is that the state requires any municipality of the population of over 4,000 people to abide by the main building code. This means that I'm not sure, as Sophie said, there are a lot of communities that will contract out, the code enforcement work. I don't know of any of them that are doing it above 4,000, because those, so I live in a small town, and the code enforcement officer doesn't have to come in and inspect. I have a temporary power going in tomorrow at my house. I don't have to have them there to inspect it. In Orono, he has to come and inspect that because he's required to go by those ordinances, by those state laws. And so the amount of work that's required, because we're a community over 4,000, is significant. And so as Sophie said, is that it's the bigger projects are so time consuming, in the tune of 100 or hundreds of hours of inspection time for one project, because they have to keep going back on different phases. Right. So it's very, very time consuming.
Dave, is that the reason for the deputy? There's a new position. Do you have a new position?
Not really a new position, but we'll talk about it when we get to economic development.
I would, you'll see in the code, I would bring out to you that there's the increase in expenditures in the code enforcement is to help pay for the certifications for our assessor. We're very fortunate that not only do we have a really good assessor, he's also a very good code enforcement officer and came to us as a certified code enforcement officer. So he's agreed to be able to keep his certifications valid so that he can serve as a backup in those positions if and when the time came, if something happened to Bill and he had to be out for a longer period of time. We have an agreement, as I talked to you before, with Old Town, but this gives us our own ability to, for a relatively small cost, it gives us 2 code enforcement officers working in the town, at least certified to be working in the town.
There's no conflict between assessor and code enforcement?
It's not, in fact, I think you'll find there are a few assessor/code enforcement officers in the state. The intent here is not to make our assessor our code enforcement officer. He's got an awful lot on his plate. But since he came with certification, as part of his employment contract, he is obligated to keep that certification. And if he's obligated to keep professional certification, kind of have to pay him for the annual training required to do.
Sure. No, I think it's an added bonus. Sophie, I did have just a general question. Did health insurance go up basically 14%?
Health insurance, we've projected a 9% increase
Code's 9.
in health insurance. You see in places where it has gone up more, and that's because of individual election changes from budget to budget. So
I was wondering.
in some departments, it's gone down because people have not elected to take health insurance, and others, for example, in assessing, we went from the administrative assistant having it and not the assessor to the assessor and the administrative assistant now having it. So that's kind of where some
So
of those
basically 9% for health insurance and main PERS, is that,
It's their retirement.
yeah, is that number's running all up and down too? I was
So
wondering.
as we allocate salary splits,
It's a percentage.
the main PERS is a percent of that. So
So
when
like
you see the
13
salary go up, main PERS is going to go up.
Okay, so the
So-
13% or the 9%, you can't
I
really
think
count.
it really went up something like 0.2%.
Okay.
There was an increase, but it was not a large one.
Okay. Anything more on code enforcement? If not, we'll move into economic development.
So the budget in front of you is not the original budget that we worked with for the first, 80% of staff budget development. We had actually, we're trying to address a few things in community development, namely economic development. And one of the things that we're trying to address is we have an amazing economic development director who comes to us with years and decades of experience, and he came in with the expectation that he was going to build a program. And the good news is that he's been doing a great job, and he's been working a lot of development through the system, and we've been making a lot of improvements to the way code, planning, and economic development work together, which I would argue was all helping our development environment to encourage people to come and build in Orono. He also has been shepherding through many projects, some of which unfortunately get all the way to the end where it's ready to talk to council and they fall apart. but a lot of activity has been happening there. So our fine economic development director also celebrated 40 years of municipal government experience this past year, and has informed me that we should really be thinking about a transition for him and this department. So we are on the 2 to 3 year plan, and normally I wouldn't worry so much, but a department in its infancy, I am a little bit concerned, and I want to make sure that Dave can get the last few things that I think are critical up and running, which would be community-based economic development, business support, that will take a little bit of time to implement. But I think that, quite frankly, is one of the things that attracted me to recruit Dave so heavily to get to Orono, is his expertise with that. So, as it happens, the person that I would select to potentially, more than potentially, succeed Dave is already on staff. And when we started looking at, it's Mitch, he's in the room, so it's not nice to talk about him. So instead of pushing Dave to try to build things on an already tight plate of work, what we're looking to do is to really look at what we see as duplication of efforts between the rec director and our economic development director, where instead have the assignment to one person as opposed to have two people doing the work, which means that our economic development director is doing TIF eligible work that allows for some of the TIF funds to be used to pay for his salary. It also will allow us to take Mitch's extensive business background and teach him about economic development and begin to develop his Rolodex, which is a very critical piece of being an economic development director, and learning from somebody that I would consider among the best in the state. So the thought is that we would transition our rec director into the economic development director position and backfill the rec director with a non-management but high functioning position, so that when we're done, our economic development director would take the highest level of responsibility for Parks and Rec as well. And there's more and more research being done that's showing that Parks and Rec and community development actually do dovetail. It would allow us to get the boots on the ground that we crave in Parks and Rec and not have to pay the top dollar for somebody who is skilled at budgeting and supervision. So the original plan had been to make that all in one transition, to create this deputy director to allow Mitch to have some more influence and credibility in the economic development arena. So it's not, I'm sending the Parks and Rec director to fill in for me at this activity. It's, I'm his deputy. So that was, the plan was to kind of move Mitch and then backfill with a full-time position. The full-time position did not make the final budget cut. So what we are suggesting at this point is a stepped approach that we would be able to evaluate through the year to see where we're ready to go next. But the thought would be that those elements that Mitch is already working on, and for Parks and Rec, the connection with businesses and festivals and marketing and trails, all of the things that are priorities in his department right he would continue to do. We would be funding those elements of his work through the TIF, which allow us to see the savings. And then depending on where Dave is, we're hoping that will take some pressure off Dave to be able to work on building those other programs or elements of the economic development department that I think are critical. And then next year, Dave and I have said, depending on where we are, Dave might be at a point where he wants to begin to back off a little bit and try to phase out, much like Evan did, maybe not next year. We really need to see kind of where we are in building. The thing that I know is that Dave does not want to come in and leave before the work is accomplished. He has his own checklist of things that need to get done. So that is the thought here.
So no increase in staff this coming year.
Yep.
Reassignment of some responsibilities. Resources to pay for that reassignment are gonna come from a little different pot, because you're gonna use TIF money. So how does that fit with our recreation program? How does,
So I think ultimately, for this year, as we begin the transition, it doesn't change anything because I'm not, Mitch, the things that Mitch is filling in are priorities that have already been developed for the rec program. We've really started to see the youth sports program settle in with the University of Maine. It took Mitch did a great job this year managing that and trying to bring people up to speed. And we are ready to bring a 3-year contract to you for your consideration on that with the university. So that programmatic piece, I think, while it will always need management, it's a relationship. I think we finally have the structure in place that it can grow and flourish. When we look at the things that are really on his list to accomplish this year, it's a lot of promotion and trails activity, working with businesses around the theater and other festivals and things like that. So there's an awful lot of overlap anyway with Parks and Rec. So for this year, it's more about just shifting and knowing that I didn't do anything. Mitch's office moved downstairs to community development, so he is in with the crowd now, and we'll be able to absorb some things. But the idea is that we will maintain the same level of commitment to Parks and Rec. And to backfill that a little bit, our facilities, just in the last few months, we've really been starting to push facilities to do more of the Parks and Rec facility stuff that Mitch was getting pulled to do. So we're kind of all around. But when Dave and I talk about bringing in an economic development director here, to get someone who is versed and understanding Orono, I mean, that's what made Evan really good at what he did with economic development, is he really understood Orono, because there are elements that just don't fit with traditional economic development in this community. And so our thought is you either have to go out and get somebody like Dave, who's kind of done it all and seen it all, so they can come in and quickly adapt, or you've got to train somebody in-house. And I really think training in-house offers us the best opportunity.
My 2 cents in this is that the way I looked at it was a little differently, in that it was just strictly from a process standpoint, is that Mitch right now would be spending about 15 hours a week doing the economic development work. And I said, in order for me to get 15 hours a week of his time. I needed to find a way that would allow him to take on, have the responsibilities for things within Parks and Rec. And so in other words, how can I trade off things? And what we've been able to do to identify certain things that community development staff can help with, and to be able to take some time away from some of the things that he had to do as part of his responsibility for Parks and Rec. Can we help him with that? For example, I have a planner who is all excited about the trail system, so he's willing to take on some of the trails programs, whether it's for signage. He does. He's going to be doing a lot of that anyway, as far as helping to plan some of that stuff. But his planning expertise will help how to be able to do a better, to best do our job of signing that. Things that may sound simple but are a little bit time consuming is that one of Mitch's responsibilities is to put kids on a bus for after school programs. One of our administrative assistants used to work at the Y in Orono in Old Town doing the exact same thing. She's been going over and helping to do that so that he doesn't have to do that. So as I said, I would say that community development as a whole is embracing him and helping take away some of that time. Arlene is our newest administrative assistant. If you haven't met her yet, I welcome you to stop down and say hi to her. Nice, very nice lady. But she's working with Mitch to deal with a lot of the phone calls, people calling up and saying, is this program still going on, or how do I pay for this? She was able to do things like that so that Mitch can spend his time that he needs to do for planning and implementing the rec department, Parks and Rec, that takes 15 hours of time off his plate so that he can do this. So that's sort of the strategy that we've been working towards, and we see it working already. I've been in the 4 years that I've been here. Mitch has, all of the departments work extremely well here. I'm amazed every day, and people don't understand my amazement, but how many of the departments just get along and stop what they're doing to help all the other departments. It happens every day. And that's not normal in a municipality, to be honest with you. So in my 40 years. So we're very, very fortunate that Sophie has created a really great team. But Mitch, I tend to work with just because of because Parks and Rec has a lot to do with quality of place. And people, when they want to invest, people come to Orono and they invest here because of where it is and what it is. They're not doing it because it's the lowest mill rate in Penobscot County. But I'm telling you is that my phone rings constantly with people who want to invest in the community. We have a large amount we have an astronomical percentage of home people working out of their home. They're an engineer that works for a company in Philadelphia, but they live here because they want to be able to do their work in the morning and they go kayaking in the afternoon. That's some of the great things that I've identified that's a real strength for Orono. So Parks and Rec couldn't go more hand in hand with community development than it does here. So I'm actually pretty excited about this. And then just as far as my exit is that I'm a big believer, and I want things to be able to, there not to be a hiccup, so that if the time came that, when I do leave, my wife's retiring next month, so I'm going to watch her first to see how she likes it. And then I'm hoping that, my plan, as I've told Sophie, is that probably 3 years I'll retire as well. I would be much happier if there was something in place that could just keep things kicking and you just don't even notice, you don't notice the difference.
The shirt alone will make sure that we notice the difference.
Exactly.
Mitch,
Well,
you got to get a little bit, you
Yeah,
blew, I
I
don't
do have
know.
to work on his attire. He's a little boring in the dress right now, but we'll work on that.
You need a wardrobe allowance in your budget.
I like that.
Don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
So bottom line though is Parks and Rec and Community Development are kind of moving things around, but no major increases either place.
Correct.
I have a question about the training in economic development too. So that's gone up like 200%. Is that for this transition?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to make a
Let's
smart
look
aleck
at it.
comment, but I won't.
Yeah.
It's for
You
me.
can,
but
you
no.
can.
So there are a couple of things that we've identified as being very important. We need Mitch to get certified as a CDBG grant administrator. Right now, Dave and I are the two in town that maintain that certification. I do not have time to do anything other than the financial pieces of that. So we definitely need him to do that. And then there are some more generic economic development pieces that we think are important building blocks to be able to take his private sector business experience and degree and transition it into a public sector. So that's kind of the plan for that training. I know the reason I can answer that right off the cuff is because I tried to get it down and he had good answers.
So going along with that, the legal service is 150% increase. Are we expecting lots of economic development?
Yes, but the other thing is that is that where we are. I mean, history is showing us that we do have more work going on, and when we're looking at credit enhancement agreements, and being reviewed, and a list of other things that we're looking at to implement. It was something that wasn't, in my opinion, wasn't adequately covered before. We had to call an orange a tangerine to try and find funding for it before. And it is a permissible expense for.
And funding at that level is actually a fraction of what we have spent this year. However, the couple of issues that we've had this year, I don't foresee will pop up again. So,
I like the way you think.
hey, it's what I do. Oh, go ahead.
So in the future, is economic development and Parks and Rec just one, just one department, one thing?
So for right, I would never meld it into one specific department. I don't know if in the long term, adding Parks and Recreation under the general community development umbrella might be a good idea. It might not be. I think see.
It is a good idea.
So I think it is important, and I was not ready to even contemplate that as part of this budget. We need Parks and Rec to operate in the same fashion on the financial statements as well as in reality for a few years. We've had so much transition in that department that we really need to bring some stability once we have, as Mitch and I like to talk in weird ways, and we have a tree, we have branches, and now we need to put some leaves on that tree, and it needs some TLC to do that. It does. Very, very strong roots. So you might see that in the future, but most definitely not blended. I don't ever want to lose the elements of Parks and Rec because there are some very specific things that they do that should be seen separate and not commingled with another department. So can I just bring your attention to a couple more things? In the budget, you will see that we are continuing to fund the reserve, that long-term reserve for the debt payments that that the TIF ends before the debt is fully paid off. So that continues to be here. Those are not truly expenditures, they are encumbrances. So there's one for $48,300 $330 and one for $2,810. So I just want to, that is purely discretional. I just wanted to point it out to you. The other thing I would want to point out to you is that when you adopt the budget, you usually in your order also give me the authority to adjust the credit enhancement agreements to reflect the true amount that is due. That's calculated as part of the tax. It's based on the value that's assigned to the TIF and the mill rate. So those might shift, and it really, to try, if you cut it down, it's probably just going to end up going back because I'm not anticipating any further reductions in any values this year. And the last thing is to highlight for you the Black Bear Express. The Black Bear Express. So remember, we have two similar but different services. We fund the Community Connector, which is Orono's portion of the regional bus. That gets funded out of other debt and other services in the general fund. The Community Connector, the Black Bear Express is truly, it's that shuttle that operates during the school year on a 30-minute rotation downtown, loops through neighborhood and one of the student housing developments, and then back down through campus and to downtown in 30 minutes. The town pays 50% of the cost of that shuttle, and we split it equally with the University of Maine. We contract for both of those services through the city of Bangor. So the city of Bangor puts on the Community Connector and the shuttle bus, as they actually carry two different sets of books for each one of the services. They determine how much it's going to cost to comply with the regulations. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, the state decided it was no longer going to serve as the recipient for federal transit funds. So it used to be that federal, I know just enough about this to be dangerous, but federal transit funds used to flow into the state, and the state would send the money down to the various communities that had public transportation that met the federal requirements. The state took care of all of the reporting and compliance assurances. When the state got out of that business, now the city of Bangor, and I'm sure others as well, but let's just talk about the city of Bangor, has to work directly with the federal government. And in doing that, it added some significant costs to the service. So that is part of what you see in both the Community Connector and the Black Bear Express. Expenses have gone up partly for that. It's an aging fleet, and so they have implemented some capitalization process, budgeting within their annual assessment. So that's another reason why our assessments are going up with that. And then the last thing that they did on the Community Connector side is they completely overhauled the assessment formula. That actually decreased our annual assessment. So you add in planning to actually have to replace the buses, the administration piece that they now had to do that costs extra money, and that would have actually ended up with a higher assessment than what we have. We came down about $3,000 because of the change in the assessment formula. So and unfortunately, I've not received the final paperwork, so I haven't adjusted the budget yet, but this week or late last week, we learned that the Black Bear expense This budget was based on an estimate. Their actual proposed assessment is $2,050 higher. So we're at that. And for the community connector, they had estimated 67,500, and their proposed assessment is $73,038. So I will have to make adjustments, and as I normally do when we go through the budget process, I'll make the adjustments, give you a list of them and the cover page so you see how it impacts. So
So I'm a little confused. So is the Black Bear Express line got the connector in it?
no, the Black Bear Express line is only the Black Bear.
So where's the
Community connector is in debt and other, which is in with my stuff. It is
Oh, it's under the
absolute
town
last
manager.
page of that, of the town manager's portion of the budget.
And did we under budget last year for the,
Yes,
Yes,
by 20,000?
not quite 20.
16 or 17.
Yeah.
Because it went up in the middle of the year.
So I mean,
That's what it was.
so
It's here too that the that the service is shared. Do the housing complexes
the only
pay some of this
housing
too?
complex, so Orchard Trails pays a small amount, I think $6,000 a year. The Avenue had too high of a estimated usage need, so they have their own bus that they are required by their permit to their permit approvals to carry, and the state traffic permit, traffic movement permit for Campus Crest didn't require anything, and at that point the town didn't require anything either. So they don't have access to the Black Bear Express. I mean, anybody can walk down to the stops, but it actually goes through Orchard Trails, which is why they pay us $6,000 a year. So Orchard Trails pays $6,000 a year. The town of Orono reaps 3 of that, and the University of Maine reaps 3 of that. We split the revenue coming in. Yes, yes, so the whole service is almost 200,000. It runs 9 months of the year. Belle, do you have a trip count right off the top of your head? It's in the 80,000, I think. Does that sound right? Yeah. I don't have the trip count on the top of my head, but my last recollection was it was about 80,000 trips a year.
That fee that we pay to support Black Bear Express comes from.
The downtown and transit-oriented TIF
TIF.
district, and my understanding is that was a driving reason why it became a transit-oriented TIF district, was to fund the shuttle. When we started out, it was a third that the town paid, a third that the university paid, and a third that the state paid. Just saying.
Well, I was thinking about that while you were explaining the shift in that it's like for our particular community, it's ironic that the population that uses it more than any other are not the population that will be now paying the extra, right? So it's right. So instead, with the shifting of the fees to the local level, property taxpayers are going to be paying for the service that's primarily, in this community anyway, used by probably non-property taxpayers. because the state got out of the business, I guess.
So the last thing I would just bring to your attention is a proposal that since the Black Bear Express is now adding capital capital budgeting for future shuttles into their assessment annually, that we stop making the payments into the bus reserve. We're at $35,000 at the end of this year. I would let it sit there, let it ride. If we blow an engine, that will give us money to replace it, and then we can talk about building it back up at that point. It's my suggestion.
I had one last economic development question. Just briefly, because the Orono Village Association was defunct, and then we weren't looking at it last year, and now we're there's a line item for business support that the narrative comments that go with it describe it as
Over.
right. Well, for expanding this. So I was just curious if you could speak briefly about your new vision for that money.
Sure. I think that there is when OVA kind of went into hiatus there, it was simply because of there was a few people that were doing all of the work, but the OVA was the Orono Village Association. It was very limited as to who could participate in it, and when I first got here, one of the most common things that I heard from businesses outside of the village area was that they would have liked to have participated in some type of a organization or a group like OVA, but on a town-wide basis. And so that's been my goal, and that's one of my things that Sophie was talking about. I really want to get working on and I want to get done, is to create more of a community-wide merchants group or a business group, so that they can work with each other to help. The whole idea of a rising tide rises all boats. So we want to be able to create an organization that would not be just limited to downtown businesses, but to all of the businesses within the community.
I would venture that probably in the earlier days of the Orono Village Association, there wasn't a lot of business activity outside of that center that would have, but things change, and especially, I mean, a lot of the sort of zoning and those sorts of discussions about new business and different districts and everything. I mean, we're actively trying to develop these areas outside of the village.
Again,
centers.
as business evolves, as I mentioned to you before, we have a really thriving amount of businesses or people who are working out of the home. And so, again, they would like to be able to be involved in a lot of business networking, but they don't have a neon sign out there that says, this is what I'm doing. But they would like to be able to participate and can bring value into working with other businesses in town as well.
I think, too, just to remember that the Village Association went hand in hand with the village district tax that we've kind of had in dormancy. And so when we were talking about spending specific additional tax dollars that were being generated in this district, it made sense to have a membership limited organization. But now that we've really stopped that, well, can't say we've stopped it. We assess the tax of zero. But
Because it is good to keep the process there.
And I kind of bring this up every year, but I still think OVA has a fairly good balance, and I'm just wondering where that money is and what's going to happen to it.
It stays in the it stays in there, and it's in their account until they decide to One of the,
So you're gonna have to reconstitute OVA to get it transferred out.
well, it's still there. That's one of the, it's sort of like the, you know,
It's interesting because we had a couple of things since OVA went dormant that they had generally agreed in concept before they went dormant to do, that we've gotten funds from them to
Correct.
do it. So it's kind
So
of,
somebody's keeping OVA together.
yeah.
Yes.
So you have a treasurer that's adding the interest and taking out the things that they had initially said they would support.
and the idea was that those funds could be, they can be redirected to another organization if that's what OVA decides to, the membership of OVA decides to do. They could direct those funds to this other entity as well. That's, at least plan on having that conversation with them anyway.
Great.
So the last thing, early, before the meeting started, I passed out an economic development budget that looks different than the one that you have in front of you. The one in your book shows you all of the economic development expenses all together so you could total it and see what we're looking to spend in economic development. Economic development budget is funded through the tax increment financing districts. We now have separate departments in our financial statements for each of the TIFs. So when you get your reports after the budget is adopted, your reports won't show a Department 19 of Economic Development. Instead, it's going to show you a Fund 20 with 3 new or multiple new departments. Each one of those departments is a TIF. So the bottom line should be the same in both of them. And it should simply be allocating what expenses are going into which TIF district, but we wanted to show you the total expense and then break it down by TIF. Does that make sense?
Correct.
What did we do?
Bottom line is the same.
Oh. It's not going to be the same. The number that should be the same is the 884, 258, 94. The community development totals are going to show you the totals for assessing, code, planning, and economic development. This is going to show you the totals for the TIF, so just economic development. Bottom line is the same, just a different way of showing the economic development budget. And the reason we're showing it to you this way this year is because that's what it's going to look like on your financial statements. Okay? Credit enhancement agreement?
So,
We're at 4 minutes left.
yeah,
right?
we're a quarter of, so. Again, but.
I have a brief update. I think I'll ask Mitch if he can come probably on June 6th. I mean, what's another, almost a few weeks. So
Maybe you brought it
I just wanted to let you know that on Friday, I fielded emails from Humane Systems Office about Alpha Gamma Rho and the code issues that we were concerned about in terms of allowable use. I was able to provide them, the systems office, with language that they needed to understand that we are not saying that this is an enforcement issue or that we are sure that it's a violation. We are saying we think that the current use is a violation, but that it might be grandfathered. It's not permissible. We know it's not permissible under the current standards, but we have every reason to believe it might be grandfathered. And last I knew, they were going to issue the lease back to the fraternities so that the activity could happen. I wanted to make you aware of that. Otherwise, things are plugging along.
Good.
So we will plan to be back here on Thursday to talk about Public Works, WPCF, and facilities, I think. Oh, yeah, we might have a lot to do on the 6th, the way we're going. But
We're third.
And you can do
Yes.
Parks and Rec first.
on the 6th?
Yeah.
Sure.
Get him out of the, since he had to wait the whole time.
Oh, we'll see. So there was an article that hit the Bangor Daily today about Orono and pedestrian safety. So just to be very clear, my library staff does not have an opinion on pedestrian safety. I think they are going to talk with the reporter about what off the record means. While not technically incorrect, the language at the beginning of the article that makes it sound like there were just tons of pedestrian accidents, and we've had 82 vehicle accidents this year, which is on target for what we would normally see in Orono. Understand that the way DOT captures the crash data, that includes all of the accidents that are reported on campus. So it's not just on town roads. The thing that Josh wanted to make sure you were aware of is that in 2019, we've had one pedestrian accident involving somebody who the police felt they couldn't issue a ticket to the driver because the person was wearing dark colored clothing and kind of stepped out into the road. And the other, last year, there were two pedestrians that were injured in a single accident. And the year before, I think there was one accident. So the message that Josh wanted to make sure you all received was that we have not had a run on pedestrian vehicular accidents.
That's a good pun.
Yeah, something like that.
What was the motivation? Like, that just kind of came out of the blue.
So,
Slow Monday
Orono-
news day.
yeah, actually, I think the reporter worked really hard and went back and forth with Belle and a little bit with Rob. And yeah, I think that, so Orono has been working on pedestrian safety. We've been part of the Heads Up campaign through the DOT. We've held public forums to talk about dangerous pedestrian places. We are among the highest crash locations for pedestrians in the state, which would make sense when you look at the other ones. It's urban areas where there is a high volume of pedestrians, and we have some of the highest volumes of pedestrians and cyclists on a per capita basis. So makes sense. I would never say that we shouldn't, that we should disregard pedestrian safety. It's something that we're really working towards. I think sometimes that in trying to get all the information, sometimes the data can get smushed a bit. And I think that's what happened here. It gave an impression that was not, I don't think, 100% accurate. But as Josh said, well, there were 82 crashes. They just weren't the majority on Park Street, and they had none of those had anything to do with pedestrians. So it's, but we have good relations with the media. We're getting ready to have something else hit about recycling. So I was interviewed today for that. So that is truly my update.
Thank you very much.
So Tom Perry